This video is about Genesis chapter 3, which is commonly referred to as the fall of man. And the title of the video is Satan Did Not Tempt Eve. So when Christians think of this passage, they often think of Satan who tempted Eve, but in the account, Satan is not mentioned. Instead, a character named the serpent is mentioned. So it's the serpent who says to Eve that she won't die if she eats from the tree of knowledge. So serpents in mythology are always very wise. They're sometimes good, sometimes evil. In the medical field, a coiled serpent around a staff is used as a symbol of medicine and healing. So just by reading this account, taking a fresh look at it without the preconceived ideas of the church or modern ideas, just going to re-examine it and ask a few questions. Is the serpent the evil character in the story, or is the serpent good? Is Yahweh evil? Or do the serpent and Yahweh just have differing agendas when it comes to human beings? Satan, which doesn't appear here, of course, is not mentioned, but the idea of Satan as a particular personage who is the arch enemy of God, opposing him all the way, comes later on from Zoroastrianism. You can look that up for yourself. But yeah, as I said, he doesn't appear in this account. So we're going to look at the character of these two, the serpent and Yahweh Elohim in the Bible, and how they dealt with the first human pair. So in Genesis 2:15, we see that Yahweh Elohim, and I'm using that because the Lord in all capitals is the tetragrammaton, YHWH, so it's Yahweh, and God is the mistranslation of the Hebrew word Elohim. The actual proper translation of that word, we don't know. No one knows how to translate it 100% correct. Some say that it's translated as powerful ones, but even that isn't 100% correct, apparently, from what I've read. But one thing I do know about we do know about Elohim, it's a plural word, and whether it's plural or singular depends on the surrounding context of the pronouns that are used. So in this case, we see Yahweh Elohim took the man, put him in the garden to work it and keep it. So he's under Yahweh Elohim's control and working as a slave. He's Yahweh's slave, tending the garden. And the command given to the man by Yahweh was, you can eat of all the trees of the garden, but in verse 17 it says, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat it, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. So just remember that it says, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. It's very important, as you'll see later on in the video. So we see here the running head in chapter 3 of the fall. So they've been given the command. The woman's been created from Adam's rib, and now we've got the fall. Now this running head is not part of the scriptural text, and it also is putting an interpretation on the text which limits the text. I believe it's incorrect. I would say that it's not a fall, but it's rather an awakening, and you'll see why I say that, actually. So that's an interpretation of the text. So we need to be careful we don't impose other ideas or modern ideas onto this text. It's actually quite a useful tool, though. This is an ESV translation of the Bible, which I really enjoy using. And these running heads actually are very helpful in finding passages of text, so I do like them, even though I think that's misleading. So who lied? That's the question now. The serpent or Yahweh or both? Who withheld information? So this is what we're going to look at. And this determines the character of the person, doesn't it? The proof is in the pudding, as they say. So in verse 17, which we read before, Yahweh said, "In the day you eat of it, you will surely die." What did the serpent say? Well, the serpent came along and said to the woman, "You will not surely die." And then in addition, he said, "For Elohim knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like the Elohim, knowing good and evil." So who told the truth? Who lied? Who withheld information? Well, it may seem shocking if I say that in this case, the serpent told the truth. Because as a former Christian, and many Christians today, when we look at Genesis 3:5, we say, well, that's the first lie. But actually the serpent told the truth here, and I'll tell you why. Just by a plain reading of the text, if we look at verse 5, he says, "When you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like the Elohim, knowing good and evil." Now, Yahweh Elohim confirms this in 3 verse 22. "Then Yahweh Elohim said, Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil." So just by a plain reading of that text, it seems that the serpent had told the truth, and the result of Adam and Eve eating from that tree was that now they knew good and evil, in that they were deciding it for themselves, just like the Elohim. So there you go. The serpent told the truth. But what about the first part where he said, you will not surely die? What did Yahweh say again? He said, "For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." So does it mean that, is the serpent correct here? That Adam and Eve, did he mean that they wouldn't die that day? Or it's a little bit ambiguous, isn't it? But Yahweh definitely says, "In the day you eat of it, you will surely die." So if someone said to me, "Don't eat that mushroom, it's really toxic. It's so toxic, in fact, the day you eat of it, you'll die," I would be expecting to die in that day that I eat it, or shortly after, not 100 years later after living a long life. So what actually happened? Well, you go to Genesis 5 for a second, 5 verse 4 and 5. It's talking about life of Adam. It says, "The days of Adam after he fathered Seth," that was his third son, "were 800 years. And he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died." So Adam ate the fruit of the tree, and he lived a long and productive life, fathering numerous sons and daughters, and died at the ripe old age of 930. So it's plain to me, from a plain reading of the text, that Yahweh lied. He told them they would die in that day, and they didn't die in that day. They kept living. On the other hand, the serpent said, "You will not surely die," and eventually they died. Now, whether that was going to be a natural consequence or not, it doesn't really explicitly say in the text, although after they sin in 3:22 it says, "Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever," and then Yahweh put him out of the garden. So that seems to indicate that there was a way for the human pair to live forever by eating of the tree of life. But interestingly, Yahweh withheld this detail. He didn't say that there was a possibility of eating from the tree of life and living forever if they didn't eat the fruit. I think this is an important detail, and it was information that for some reason Yahweh withheld from them. So that's an interesting point as well, which goes to deciding about the character of Yahweh and the character of the serpent. The other thing that was withheld too, which is interesting, Yahweh said, "In the day you eat of it, you'll surely die." And he didn't mention anything else. He didn't say that you'll suffer horribly and then die. He just said you'll die. But then in 3 verse 16, after they had eaten and Yahweh was walking through the garden calling out, "Where are you? Where are you? You know, have you eaten from the tree?" And which is a strange detail as well. It kind of portrays Yahweh as a parent who doesn't know what his children are up to. But that's a side point we won't look at. But in verse 16, so is saying to the woman that she's going to suffer with childbirth now. In fact, all women would. And to Adam, he's going to struggle to produce food. And the ground is cursed because of you. And then you'll return to the dust. So God, it's almost as if Yahweh is adding to their punishment. And he didn't mention that before, which seems unfair, doesn't it? If you just have a cursory reading of that. So far, it seems that the serpent, being the wise character he is more benevolent than Yahweh. In my opinion, they just seem at odds with one another, like they have different views of how humans should be treated. But what I see as well is that the serpent is trying to show the man and woman that they don't have to be under the control of Yahweh. They can fend for themselves and have freedom. Whereas Yahweh wants to keep them in a bubble of protection, and so they can be his slaves and work in the garden. So this is kind of like when you're a child and you're growing up, and eventually you get to a stage where you move out of the family home and you fend for yourself and you decide how to live your own life. And in that context, if we go back to 3 verse 16 and 17, it kind of changes the meaning of this for me anyway, from Yahweh adding to their punishment to this just being a natural consequence of the fact that the man and women have moved out from under Yahweh's control and they're living their own life, and along with that brings hard decisions and pain. So, they have to make their own decisions. Sometimes things go wrong, which it does in life. So it's just part of life, the struggle of life, outside of the control of Yahweh. So, I don't think it would be fair to say that Yahweh added curses. I think these were additional pains which Yahweh and the serpent knew would befall the humans if they ate from the tree. So in that sense then, I think the running head is incorrect. I don't think it should be the fall. I think it should be the awakening. I think this is when humans awakened and they started to fend for themselves and to live their life on their terms, determining good and evil for themselves. So I don't see it as them falling into sin, but rather they were experiencing an awakening and making decisions for themselves, which Yahweh wasn't happy about. So, but the humans did it anyway, and Yahweh let them go. He clothed them, and the rest is history, as they say. So that's my take on Genesis. I'm not being dogmatic about it. I don't think that's the only interpretation, but I do think that, for me personally, that does answer a lot of questions. It's more interesting, and I think the concepts of the fall of mankind into sin and death and all that, I think that's been added and imposed on this account by later Bible writers and teachers. And I think that's incorrect. I think it should just be looked at by itself in its own context. So that's my take on it anyway. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and add a comment as well. I enjoy reading comments and different opinions of people. So in that way we can learn a lot from each other. So thank you, and see you next time.